Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Doing Life, a podcast brought to you by Cornerstone Church Bluffton. On this week's episode, Pastor Matt and Pastor Mark talk about resolving conflict in our personal relationship. They also talk about how to reconcile with Scripture when a conflict is clearly described and how we should take action with that person and still love them. They also talk about some of the best parenting advice in resolving conflict and correcting our children without crushing their spirits. And finally, they touch on navigating the years of a family with young children and how to keep your relationship with your spouse thriving through those years.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome back, Matt. We sure did miss you last week. How was your time away in Florida?
It was good. Good to get away and just have some fun time with my family. Check out Universal Studios. A little Hollywood action going on for us. Harry Potter and all that stuff.
Well, okay, so listen, we've been talking about relationships over the last month or so, even in our sermon series, but also the podcast. So tell me one highlight from your trip that had to do with relationships with your kids or your wife.
Well, I think for us, it was kind of the first opportunity we've had to take just a family vacation, like just the 5 of us. Usually we go on trips and it's us with extended family and that sort of thing. So this was just good to just have some time where we could have fun and just kind of be our little family unit together. So it was great just to see that and kind of sharing some of the stuff my kids are excited about. They just finished reading a few of the Harry Potter books, and so we took them to Universal to check out Harry Potter Land or whatever you want to call it. And they were really excited to, get wands and do all the Harry Potter stuff. So just having the opportunity to hang out with them and be kind of our little family unit was really great, because I think that's really important as a family, that you just set up, you guys as an identity. So.
Yeah, and in this case, you were able to enter into their world a little bit as they've been reading through this book, and something that was meaningful to them.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So listen, Sunday we talked about resolving conflict, or 4 steps to overcoming conflict in our relationships. So I shared the story initially that there were 2 sisters who lived in England that didn't speak for 40 years. Which 40 years amounts to 14,610 days. Yeah. It amounts to 350,640 hours and 21,038,400 minutes. That's a long time.
That's quite a bit of time.
Okay, so in the story, and this is actually a true story, we're not really sure why the one sister was so upset with the other sister that they wouldn't speak to each other. But it's actually my wife's grandmother. So my wife's grandmother got married to an American soldier, moved to the States, and even every time she went home, she would be staying basically across the street. And they had absolutely no relationship for 40 years.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy. And so, of course, they've both passed away, and so I can't go back and ask them, like, hey, tell me why that happened. But here's the thing that it really made me think about is, what are the ways, or what should we be doing to try to help overcome conflict in our relationships with other people? And so we were in Romans 12 talking through, that particular passage. But what would you say to people? I mean, just in this advice on how do you overcome, or how do you start? If somebody hadn't talked to you for even 5 years or 10 years because there's been some sort of a problem in the relationship, what would you do to start trying to reconcile that relationship?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I think if we're all honest, there are going to be periods in our lives, and maybe there have been, where we're not going to feel up to having a relationship with someone who we don't really get the choice of whether or not we want to be in relationship with them, like our family. For me personally, that's a really kind of close to home situation, because with my own family, I have kind of some strained relationships. And one of the things that I've been really convicted on lately is my inability to communicate with one of my family members, and just some choices that they made. And I've allowed, I think, my principles, or at least things that I believe are principles, to get in the way of the value that person has, not just as a member of my family, but just as a person in general. And so, in Romans 12, I think you mentioned this in your sermon, where Paul encourages us that as far as it concerns us, we have to live at peace with everyone. And I don't think that means that you get along with everyone, that you're best friends with somebody, or
Right.
you're going to like social events with them and just acting like nothing's wrong. I don't think that's the case. I think to live at peace with others means sometimes you have to get over yourself and be humble. And I think that's the biggest struggle, is when we really want to stand on our principles. Sometimes our principles are built more on pride than they are on principle. And if we can't be humble enough to kind of set our feelings aside for the sake of the other person, I think that says more about where we're centered than what our principles say. So for me, I'm working through just those pride feelings of how do I reach out to this person that I just have a hard time getting excited about talking to. So it's not even like agreeing with their choices or celebrating what they're celebrating or things of that nature. It's really more of like, how do I let them know that I still love them and value them, and that I still want to have a relationship with them, and working through that. And I think it begins there with humility. What can I do? How do I need to get out of the way? Because I may be holding on to something that is more important, or the person is more important than the thing that I'm holding on to.
Yeah, it's interesting. You reference that place in Romans 12. Paul starts that particular portion of Romans 12 with let love be without hypocrisy, hate what is evil, cling to what is good.
Yeah.
And so often our anger or frustration with people is not geared towards the sin that might be in them. It's at them. And sometimes we lose sight of that God loves the sinner. He hates the sin.
Yeah.
And how do we work through that and navigate through that when, especially in your situation, you're talking about a family member. This isn't somebody that is just a friend of yours that was a friend for a while. I mean, this is somebody that's close to your family, and you're trying to navigate through that. But you're so right. As far as it depends on us, live at peace with all men, and we do have to do our part to rise above the circumstances and determine how we can walk in those relationships and not allow the evil or the sin or those wrong choices to mean that we're not going to have any relationship with you whatsoever.
Right.
I had a conversation one time with someone and just reminded them about how patient the Lord is with us.
Yeah.
In our own sin. How many times did we fail? How many times did we fail? How many bad choices we made? And God's been so incredibly patient.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about this. Like, if God did not see the law as something to continue to keep us down, He sent Christ to take care of the law issue for us. So God didn't stand on His principles of right and wrong in relationship to us. So is it fair for us to stand on our principles of right and wrong in relationship to other people? And I think there are times where it's difficult and it's tough, but there's a choice to be made. And I think it takes time to get to a place where, you just choose day after day. Like, I can't cling to that, to my principles. I can't cling to the thing that makes me upset so much. I need to just let it go. So I think taking the first steps of like, I just want to let this thing go before you start interacting with the person even. Right. It's like, can I just get some personal freedom from this thing so that then I can move forward in relationship with that person? I think that's an important thing to look at. And so for me, that's kind of where I'm at, is how can I let go of this thing, my principle or whatever it is that I feel like I'm holding on to, so that I can move forward.
So let me ask you this then. How do you reconcile then the portions of Scripture where they're it's very clear about what our response should be, such as even Jesus's conversation on church discipline, where he's talking about you should confront, and even withdraw fellowship, and even get into the place in the book of 1 Corinthians where Paul says, no, I'm telling you that you should expel the immoral believer from among you. So how do we reconcile those types of relationships? How do we reconcile standing on, you've used the word principles, but how do we stand on, hey, this is what we believe is right, but still pursue the person?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is like God values, and I think Jesus has shown us this, that He values people over principle. That he displayed His great love for us in sending Jesus for us. even though he has defined clearly like what is right and wrong and how we should live our lives, he didn't allow that to be the thing that would separate us from him. I mean, Romans 3 talks about how the law is not enough to save us. And so he provided a bridge to salvation through Jesus. And I think that alone is enough for us to say, look, if God can humbly say, I need to provide a path to relationship, then that's what we should pursue in our relationships. And I mean, you look at like Jesus when he meets the woman caught in adultery in John, in the Gospel of John, where he tells the people around, like, he who's without sin cast the first stone. But it's not that he rejected those people. He rejected the attitude they were approaching the woman with. Like he would get upset with Pharisees, but that's because the Pharisees would hold on to the principled thing rather than embrace the people around them. And I think that's where the Pharisaical attitudes go wrong, is when we say that a principle is more valuable than a person, when we say that this thing is more, this idea is more important than the image-bearing human being across from us. That's where we have a really tough time. And I think Jesus embraces that as well. I mean, you look at, I think of this, when Jesus is being arrested in the garden and Peter takes out his sword, and Peter strikes a man and he chops off his ear. Like Peter's reacting to try and protect Jesus, and you would think like, yeah, that's what we need to do, rally around Jesus. But Jesus rebukes Peter in that moment, and then he heals one of the soldiers that are arresting him in that moment. So like, if anybody had a reason to like be like, okay, it's okay to chop this guy's ear off, it was Jesus in that moment. But he doesn't. Yeah. I mean, he just kind of submits himself to the scenario he finds himself in. And I mean, we're not all Jesus, I'm not saying go out and, I think we strive to be like Jesus, but recognizing like we might struggle with that. I just think there's a really important idea in valuing people over our principles. And sometimes I think when we really search and find, our principles can sometimes be more grounded in our own opinions rather than what is expressed in the scriptures or things of that nature. So.
Yeah, and I'm reminded just about Jesus and his own ministry, the times that he would heal on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees and people in the synagogues would they'd go nuts.
They'd lose their minds. Yeah.
And Jesus was constantly bringing them back to, well, what's more important?
Right.
Well, this person that I healed is more important than keeping this law.
Than not, not walking too far on the Sabbath. Like that's not more important than a person.
Yeah. So I think that's all really good and helpful for people, and I know that you're living in that and the challenges that brings.
And it's a tough tension.
Yes.
But I think we're called to walk that tension.
Yeah. Absolutely. So switch gears for a little bit. What's the best parenting advice you would give to those that might be listening?
I think one of the things that just as a dad that I don't have it all together. Let me just preface everything.
You don't? Are you sure?
No, not at all. And if you ask my kids, like, hopefully they would be kind in what they would say of my fathering. But I think when it's kind of in a similar vein as this, like, my kids are more important than even the things I think I'm trying to teach them in the moment. I don't want to crush them. I don't want to crush their spirits. I want to show them that they have a value that cannot be shaken as my daughters. And so, if they mess up or whatever, like, I've got to keep myself in a position of keeping it cool. Like I get frustrated sometimes when stuff gets left out, and we're trying to teach our kids, like, you need to clean up after yourselves. It's kind of that basic tenet thing. And I know if my own parents were listening, they'd be like, well, you didn't do that when you were a kid. So, but it's not, their toys being left out is not more important than their place as a daughter in my household.
Yeah. So tell everybody how many kids you have. How old are they?
I have 3 girls that are 10, 7, and 5.
Yeah.
And so they're still learning. They know things that we're teaching them. They don't know a lot of things that we feel like we're always trying to teach them. Yeah. But the grace, I think embracing grace as a father is really important, especially as a father, because you're always going to be set up as kind of the primary authority figure. And if you can show them what grace looks like, they will see grace through you. They'll learn what grace is especially when they hear about God's grace.
Yeah.
Like they will picture you when they hear that God is a father. And that rocked my world, just to think like, man, my example as a dad is affecting how my girls will view God.
Yeah.
And I think embracing grace has been tough for me, but I think it's the biggest thing. Like, discipline's important, absolutely, but man, grace is so much more important.
Yeah, so my wife Carrie and I have 5 kids, and they're range in age from 14 to 8. And it is interesting because we wound up with twins last. And so when I say we have an 8-year-old, we actually have 2 8-year-olds. And we realize how different our life is because we have 5 kids instead of 2 kids.
Yeah.
So my wife, super organized person, but also realizes that because we have 5 kids, there's a whole lot more grace than there probably would have been if we'd had 2, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
And but I think for me, when I look at just the rhythm of life and where we are, my biggest, parenting tip or advice that I would give to parents is to try to establish a healthy rhythm to your life. And what I mean by that is, for us, it's important that we sit around the dinner table at night, and have conversation. It's important. We've set aside, Friday nights for our families, kind of pizza and movie night. And we really strive to say, hey, we're going to guard that night and we're going to do it together as a family. And that's challenging because you have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and they have 8-year-olds that don't necessarily want to watch the same movies. But it's just about us trying to spend that time together as a family, and the grace thing comes into that so often because you're just navigating through that, and it gets frustrating some Friday nights because things don't go exactly like you want, or sitting around the dinner table and nobody wants to eat what's put on the table and those types of things, and trying to navigate through. Okay, how do I respond? How should I respond? Which is some of what I talked about last week in the podcast, and just going, hey, I do need my speech always to be with grace as though seasoned with salt.
Yep.
And responding differently. So, kids are different. That's the other thing that I'm learning is how different like a 14-year-old is versus a 9 and an 8-year-old.
There's so many factors that go into like where your kids are going to be at too.
Right.
And I think it's really good that you bring up that setting that schedule, or really I think protecting your family time. And showing your kids that, hey, our family is important, and it's more important than, schedules or the activities we'd like to be a part of. You can get so lost in keeping up with the Joneses that you forget to instill the value of family.
Yeah. So let me throw this out there, just kind of picking up from that question as well. So you have kind of a young family, and I do as well. So as you've come through those years of having an infant and a toddler, and you don't have that, what would you say to those couples that have younger kids in the house right now that are in that, we have a 6-month-old or an 8-month-old or a 12-month-old or a 2-year-old? I mean, what advice would you give them as they're trying to determine how am I going to make it through this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's 2 things. Like, one, don't try to do everything at once, but also remember that it goes a lot faster than you think. So, if you're sitting down with your 8-month-old, and I think it's great to read and things with your family and have those family times, but you're not going to teach deep lessons to your toddler. You're not going to have maybe like a family reading time quite at the same level. Like our kids are reading the Harry Potter books. My 5-year-old can't handle reading the Harry Potter, like a chapter of Harry Potter, like just the length of time.
Right.
Not even the subject matter. That doesn't matter. Right. It's just she's not interested that long. But our 10 and 7-year-old, they can hang around for it, and they're into it. So, we don't force her to sit and listen during that time. Mm-hmm. There's just a way of, I think, handling your stage of life, and handle every kid in the stage of life that they're in. Don't expect your 5-year-old to behave like your 10-year-old, which is hard sometimes, because you want everybody on the same page. But I think finding, and it goes back to that grace principle of, man, it's okay to be where you're at and embrace where you're at, and do what you can and really protect. I think, man, your schedule idea is huge there too. If you want to be present for your kid, learn how to be present for them when they're young, so that when as they get older, they just expect you to be present, and you're there, and you expect to be present. healthy habits, man. That's really important.
Oh, it's huge. So let me go to you and Amanda then for a minute. How did you guys make it through those young years together as a couple? Not as parents, like how did you parent, but like how did you survive as a couple and even maybe found room to thrive in the midst of those years?
Yeah, well, for me in our relationship, I defer a lot to Amanda. She is, for every amount of wisdom that I have, she is 10 times more wise, or that sort of thing. But I understood that in our family and the decisions that we've made, she's the primary caregiver to our kids, and so she knows what's going on with them. She's with them, and she's a homeschool mom, and so she's at home and she's schooling them, and she knows exactly where they're at and what their needs are. And it is not wise for me to go to work for 8 hours a day and then come home and try to tell her what our kids need. So I think just finding that it's okay for me, even though I'm the head of the household and that sort of thing, and I've got this responsibility as a man, to recognize that, man, my wife this is her calling. This is what God has equipped her to do, and she's knocking it out of the park. So I should just, support her in that as best as I can. And sometimes it means I have to, give strong opinions, that sort of thing. But for the most part, I mean, she's just a rock star mom, and does a great job with our girls, and is taught. She's really reproducing herself in them, and which, in my opinion, is better than me reproducing myself in them. So they're far better off being like their mom than they are myself. But I think that, like, you find a place where, and I think this goes to like Ephesians 5, where it talks about husbands and wives and relationships, and it's really just making sure that I'm humble enough to say to my wife, hey, I support you, I'm in with you, but I don't have the same perspective on this that you do, and I trust you. I mean, how important is it to just give our spouses trust? Yeah. And not just in their, if they're stay-at-home moms, then trust them in that role, but if they're working, trust them in that role too. And I think trust is always better than suspicion. And so if I come home with questions or things like that, I think that says more than just me encouraging her and saying, hey, I trust where we're at as a family.
So take that in another direction, though, and what you said is so true, and I have my own examples of that in my life. But how about your marriage, though? I mean, like, how did you guys, move through? I mean, how did you stay married? How did you pursue each other? How did you, those types of things? Yeah. Not just as parents, but I mean, as a couple, how did you survive those times?
I think you fight for it.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like I'm much more the driver in that way. That those things stand out more. I'm more social than my wife is. I'm extroverted, she's introverted, so I need time with her and for us to just be together. And so if it's been a while for us that we haven't had like date nights or just time together, I push for it, and I don't settle in those regards. And so for me, it was, I'm going to fight for our relationship. So I'm going to make sure, like, I'm going to do my best to check in with her and try to be positive and hear, how's her day going and what's big on her plate right now, what's she really thinking of as far as the, over the next month, what's in the future, that sort of thing. But two, to make sure that, hey, we're still laughing, we're still having fun. To make sure that when I come home, try to be present as best I can, which is not easy. And especially when work kind of can call at any moment, or you're still thinking on something. For me, like, right, I'll think on things for hours and kind of obsess over it. And so making sure that I'm just being intentional with my kids and trying to engage with them when I get home, that sort of thing, and relieve there. I think those are important things. And as they get older, they don't need that as much. But man, when you've got, when Nora was first born, our youngest, we had a 5, a 3, and a newborn. And so, man, you have to be a lot more hands-on during that time in interacting with your kids than now, where they're 10, 7, and 5, and I can just sit down and have a conversation with them pretty easily. Right. Whereas before, I used to have to get on the ground, wrestle around with them, try to wear out some energy from the day, that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's just making sure that you're engaging well, and I'm sure you found that to be true as well. With 5, I can only imagine.
Yeah, my biggest thing was trying to be intentional with Carrie, and so we had set aside time after our twins were born, so we had 5 in the house, and there was just one night during the week that I wouldn't bring any work home. I left the office. I went home. I left everything on my desk.
Yeah.
And I just went home, and we, we'd have date night that night at the house. We didn't go out. We got the kids to bed. We had a pretty good routine about, hey, we're going to get them in bed. We're going to feed them, those types of things. And then, once they went to bed, I'd grill steaks or something. We'd sit down, have dinner together, just the two of us. And we'd sit we had a sofa in our bedroom. We'd sit there and we'd talk through the day and, what was going on. And that was a big deal. Yeah. That really got us through a season where, it was a lot. And trying to find those healthy rhythms, I can't say that enough, to find healthy rhythms for what works for you as a family. That may not work for you as a family. That worked for us.
Yeah.
Date night at home, we didn't go out. We still don't go out a ton. And we just try to find those nights where we can just be together and talk through the day and just enjoy each other's company. Yeah. There's just nothing like just the two of us being able to sit down and talk through the day.
One of the other things that's really been big is allowing my wife to still be like her own person,
right?
An individual. So she has relationships that she wants to invest in, and making sure that I don't groan every time she wants to go out on a Saturday morning and have coffee or breakfast with one of her friends. Like learning to change my reactions to those things. It's not that I mind or anything like that. It's just I tend to I'm a humor guy, and so sometimes when I think I'm being funny, she doesn't receive it as funny. And so I think just being supportive of that and saying, look, it's okay for you to have time, because I have time as well. Like have a break and let her be who she is. And sometimes that means she wants to go out shopping by herself because she's an introvert and she just needs some time on her own. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for the insight. And we are launching a new series this Sunday called World War U. We're going to be going through Galatians chapter 5 and 6, talking about the struggle between the flesh and the spirit that's in all of us. And it's going to be a great series as we dig into it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, what a great opportunity just to, I think, be encouraged and equipped to handle some of the big things that are going on around us. It's easy to get caught up in some of the things that are enticing to us, as far as, the things that are in the news or things that are happening down the street from us. And I think it's just going to be an awesome time to kind of learn how to handle those things a little bit better.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for listening. Hope you guys have a great weekend.